relatively specific subject, which is on ASEAN economies and the question whether they are moving towards circularity or not. We have spoken of waste, we have spoken of plastics, we've spoken of regional actions in this field. Today we'll get a slightly more specific and nuanced perspective on what it means to be transitioning towards a circular economy. So before we get into the discussions, let me request Helena to open the session and provide us with the opening remarks. Helena?
Thank you, Ankit. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Fantastic. It's so good to see you all. I haven't got my proper backdrop on. I don't know why that didn't happen, but never mind. So circular economy, it's something that I'm personally so passionate about, and I've been incredibly fortunate to see some of our work, actually some of Ankit's work in Laos, in Lao PDR. I've seen some fantastic work that we're doing in Thailand as well on refuse-derived fuel and scaling it using really innovative structuring models. So that's now being rolled out to over 20 different dump sites. I've also been extremely fortunate to see our work in Senegal, where we're just about to open the first plastics recycling plant in the country. I visited our e-waste facility there, funded by Luxembourg. So some really exciting first in markets that are coming through. And it is making such a difference. Now, I don't know whether you are like me, but I go to so many countries these days and my heart sinks because of the amount of plastic. So as we are in this last quarter of the year, we have this sort of momentum gathering with big events, the COP16 biodiversity in Colombia, the COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, and then, of course, the Plastics Summit in Busan in November. And these are all really key events. And, of course, that Busan event is extremely key for the circular economy. So I'm really excited and happy to welcome all the panelists and all the people watching in terms of this circular economy presentation today. So we work in this way in a number of different countries around the world, and our work is building in this space, and no least in Asia, where we've been really fortunate to partner both with Korea and with ASEAN on a really exciting initiative that will do a lot to address the circularity gap and to move us from that linear economy to the circular economy. So can we also safely say that Asia is also becoming less circular and following the global trend? Or is Asia and ASEAN moving in a different trajectory? Now, I have seen some of the countries in Asia, and Thailand is, I think, again, one of the leaders where the circular economy is actually at the center of all their policy work. Now, there may still be a gap between what is implemented on the ground to what is in policy, but these are really significant changes, I think, and progressions in Asia that I see coming through. So under our work with ASEAN, we assess the circular economy and waste policy framework in all Asian or ASEAN member states, and not one of the states measured the circular economy, except Indonesia, which attempted to do it. And that begs the question, if ASEAN economies do measure circularity, is there something we can do if it's not being measured well? So these are all questions that are going to be addressed today. Are the existing policies in the right direction? Will they help achieve circularity? And I'm sure many more questions will be raised today. So I want to thank Yvonne, Jack and David for joining us. Jack represents Chatham House and he led a study on a global circular economy policy stocktake. David just recently organised the ASEAN Circular Economy Forum, and I'm sure he will have views and takeaways to share with us. So I'm really looking forward to listening to everybody, to learning from the experts. And yes, just to, share your optimism and your energy around this incredibly important area that just means so much to all of us. So Ankit, back over to you. Thank you again.
Thanks, Helena. So yeah, I mean, you raised a point where I mean, this is actually Yvonne's team's work, the circular economy team, that says that the world is becoming less circular. And we don't know how the Asian economies are trending within that larger trend, but we'll hear more from her possibly today on that. But just to just to contextualize some of these questions that we are asking, and we're trying to understand and get a better perspective on. So ASEAN as a whole has a framework, a sort of a series of policy and vision statements that point towards the strong will of transitioning towards circularity. Now, given the context that we have, that transition from linear to circular is not going to happen just like that or through market forces alone. It needs a concerted policy measures and lots of incentives, disincentives to be put in place. And the question here is, do the actions that we have seen so far take us in that direction? Or even the actions that have been identified, can they take us in that direction? And we don't know. There's not enough to answer that question because, as Helena pointed out, we looked at the policy initiatives in all the ASEAN economies, and we could not come up with an answer as to how circular are these economies. Now, if you can't measure, can you really change and can you really implement something? And that's where some of these larger questions keep coming up. And there have been independent studies by CSIRO and certain researchers on measuring the material flows, having monitoring frameworks for circularity, and so on and so forth. But none of them find a mention or are not adopted yet by formally by any of these governments. So where do that leaves us? Uh, and with that question, I will be asking these questions to the three experts here who have spent a lot of time on this area, and they have gone through some of these processes with some of the other developed economies. So we have with us Yvonne, Jack, and David. Uh, I leave the introductions on the screen, not repeat, and when they come in, I'm sure they will share some of their key work with us. So, with that context and the experts in the room, I would like to go to the first key question that we have for today, which is, do we know how circular is ASEAN? I mean, we haven't got a right answer, but then if that's the question, how is it that we should be approaching it? And how should we measure circularity, and what does it mean to do it? Uh, and to take us through that perspective, I would request Yvonne to come online and share your perspectives on it. Yvonne?
Sure. Yeah, thank you so much, Ankit, and thank you, Helena, for laying out the land. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, while Ankit shares his screen and our slides, a bit of background on Circle Economy. Circle Economy is a foundation, nonprofit organization based out of Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And we have been working towards researching the circular economy, but more specifically, the solutions that are needed to transition from our linear to a circular economy for the last 13 years. And specifically, the Circularity Gap Report that was referred to earlier has been a research product of our team for the last 8 years. And since we've been measuring for the last 6 years, the global economy, we've really been able to pinpoint the material flows, identifying key systems and solutions. And that's what I also want to bring to you today. What is the measurement and how do we actually use the insights? And I think that's also where Ankit rightfully points out, how do we measure the circular economy, and what does it bring when you actually have that data-driven approach is what I'll share with you today. So the data-driven approach is all about measuring and piloting and scaling. And I see some of my visuals aren't in the slide, but I can just talk you through it. The final number for this year's Global Circularity Gap Report is 7.2%. Feel free to scan the QR code for the full report. It's available on our website. This is just the shortcut. And 3 insights that I'd like to share with you about the global report for this year is that we found through our research that the conversation around circularity has tripled around the globe, in some areas more or less, but in general, there is more discussion around circularity, and that means it's being adopted into circular roadmaps for national and subnational plans. It's been designed into policies. Companies have adapted circular solutions. So it's tripled, which is good news. However, if we look at the actual number, 7.2 from the 9% when we started measuring 6 years ago, it's going backwards. And we have now used 500 billion tons of material. And for those who are researchers, they might be able to fathom what that number means. When I first heard about that number, I can't relate to a number that big. But what is good to know is that that same amount of resource extraction is the equivalent of almost the entirety of the 20th century. So in 6 years, we've extracted almost as much as the 100 years prior. And I think that's something that all of us, when we realize that hockey stick effect of our resource extraction, should realize that it's time to bend that curve and to really look at how do we use the materials that we have already extracted in a different way, longer, repurpose it, and really designing out waste. And I wholeheartedly share Helena's remark about seeing the plastic waste on every single continent is really heartbreaking, and that does need to be cleaned up. At the same time, not instead of, but at the same time, we also need to look upstream and see where all this trash is coming from and how we can start valorizing the output, the waste that we call waste today, and see waste as an input. And based on our research and our calculations, we actually believe that we can still reverse the planetary boundary overshoots that are in place today by implementing these circular solutions. Now, to just deep dive into that a little bit, what we've done in our material flow analysis is really point out what material is used for which social or societal need, if you will, whether that's the built environment, whether that's food and agri, whether that's consumables or mobility. It's really looking at where are the pinpoints of your efforts needed most to drive in an accelerated transition. What I see around Southeast Asia, but also in other parts of the world, honestly, is that there's a lot of efforts, there's a lot of projects and programs already in place, but there are pockets everywhere. And I think when we look at the data, we would be able to do a more concerted effort towards resolving the linear issues and replacing them with circular solutions. So one of the material flows that we actually have published is the societal needs, link them to the planetary boundary overshoots, and then we've also mapped them to country profiles being grow, shift, and build. And obviously across Asia and Southeast Asia, we're looking more at the build and the grow nations, and different solutions are applicable to different nations. And this is also where the research we do enables governments and industry leaders and financial institutions to understand where the transition is needed most and how to actually gauge all of the different initiatives to be able to also give out loans, give out investments. And this is where our work also links to financials to make sure that the whole transition will cost trillions, but the opportunities of jobs and the other side of the circular economy, when we're looking at the impact on nature, when we look at the impact on the planetary boundaries in general, the upside of that, of course, is something that we need to measure and also valorize so that the financial institutions can unlock their funding. So what we also want to deep dive into is that when we do a circularity gap report, which is relevant whether it be in South America, in Europe, we're now starting in Middle East, but also in Southeast Asia, the convening of the key stakeholders being the industry leaders, the policymakers, but also the financial institutions is key. So with a circularity gap report, what we also do is make sure that everyone in the room agrees to the numbers, agrees to the findings, and agrees to a way forward, so that it's not just a report, that it's not just something that is researched and then ends up in someone's drawer, which is the worst case scenario, but really is embraced by these stakeholders to take forward in a roadmap and then start measuring against that. So based on all of the work that we have done across the region, specifically in Europe and South America, parts of Canada, we're also driving now towards further extension across the globe. The Middle East, Jordan and Oman are the first that will engage in a circularity gap report to have that same data-driven approach to define their policies, but also to design out their tax and their financial products. At the same time, we're looking towards India at the moment, and we are very keen to also drive this, of course, forward into the next region being North and Southeast Asia. So based on these insights, right now, we have no idea how circular Southeast Asia is. We've seen different reports, we've seen different research papers, but we haven't seen the actual numbers. And I think when we look at the European and the US markets being the consumer markets and the Southeast Asian, Northeast Asian region also being the manufacturing countries, there's going to be a very different number. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a lot higher than Europe, simply because it's a different makeup of the economy. And I don't know, for those of you who are familiar with the Circular Economy Network in Taiwan, they've actually published this book with over, I believe, 300 or 200, case studies of circularity implementations throughout Taiwan. And those types of cases should be shared across the board to be able to learn from each other and be able to not reinvent the wheel. And this is something that I'd like to also share with you. These are the conversations that we've been having across the region. We're about to set up a consortium throughout Southeast Asia. Some have already indicated that they would like it to be in North Asia as well, but it will be a circle of action, as we call it, which is a working title. But it's about being deliberate and targeted, where we would actually measure the current state of the economy, identify pilot projects, ensure that they are enabled by knowledge sharing, capacity development, evaluate the impact of it, and identify which solutions can actually scale, not just within that economy, but also broader throughout the region. And all of that always bearing in mind the just transition lens to enable jobs and to also identify skills that are needed in a circular economy. And that consortium would then also be relevant for an inspiration, if you will, source of inspiration to take that same approach to other regions. Now, for those of you who are maybe less familiar with circularity, I have a little gift. Please go ahead and scan the QR code. It's an award-winning documentary. It also features, amongst other, Arthur Huang, who's a Taiwanese designer and the CEO of MiniWiz. Very inspirational, talking about designing out waste to ensure that we look at products and services in a very different way to avoid all of the plastics that we're now trying to clean up, even getting there in the first place. Don't forget to note down the password so that you can actually view the film with your colleagues, your friends, your family, and we can inspire. Just by looking at nature, we can be inspired towards the solutions. And hopefully we can soon also bring out numbers throughout Southeast Asia to start measuring the circularity, being more deliberate about our actions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Yvonne. So there we have it. We don't know how circular our economies are, and we don't know whether they are becoming more or less circular. Are they following the global trends? And Yvonne also highlighted how it's critical that it's not just the government, but also the industry and the finance and the all other sectors of the economy are involved. So it's a very conscious effort. And it can't be a knee-jerk reaction at all. But you heard a lot on this subject. I mean, if you go to any of the visioning document or development plans that these countries are laying out, they're all identifying circularity as one of their key sort of aspects of the next stage of growth. And at this point, I would like to introduce Jack. Uh, Jack measured and sort of evaluated policies across the world, including Southeast Asia. And let's hear how that is turning out and whether the actions that we want correlate with the actual sort of interventions that we've identified. Over to you, Jack.
Thank you, Ankit. Maybe whilst the slides are going up, and just to say, I've got a bit unstable internet, so I might turn my video off at some point. But just to pick up on Yvonne's point, because I've been involved actively in kind of circular economies, kind of gap reports. I did it in Scotland way back several years ago, at the city level, then at the national level, then I was advisor in the UK working group. And what I have to say is these gap reports are really valuable, not just for the kind of data scan, but actually building communities of practice to actually set a baseline with which to develop robust strategies going forward. It's kind of your baseline study, which is really valuable to get everyone on the same page. So I'd really echo Yvonne and her team's work on this. I think it's valuable. So going on to myself, yeah, I'm a senior research fellow at Chatham House, and we, for the past decade now, have been looking in a lot of detail on the circular economy, particularly global developments. Everything from the intersections of the circular economy with international trade, with global finance, and with the development agenda, which is really critical and often missed in the discussion. So if you go to the next slide, what I'm going to briefly talk to you today about is a report we published, and it's based on the premise that, as Ankit said, we've at Chatham House, we've mapped over 600 pieces of policy and legislation linked to the circular economy across 110 countries. And these were launched from 2010 onwards, so very recently. But then, even if you just take in the past few years, there's now the emergence of national roadmaps and strategies around the world, where governments are attempting to move from an individual policy approach to the circular economy to more systemic transformation and coordinated approach. But unfortunately, despite dozens of roadmaps now being published on every continent, we have actually very little understanding of what's in these roadmaps. What are governments actually committing to? And when you sum up all of these commitments, what does that mean for global value chains? What does that mean for actors in the ASEAN region? And so we've tried at least to take a first attempt to evaluate all of these roadmaps and strategies and really try and understand what the key trends are in the next decade in terms of circular policy. And this is the report here that you can scan and have a look at. It's freely available. We did it in partnership with UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. If we go to the next slide, there's three key numbers. You probably want to click through a couple of times so that the numbers come up. But the first number is 75, and that's the number of national circular economy roadmaps that have now been published today. And 95% of those were published since 2016. So this is an incredibly recent phenomena. But probably what's more interesting is that when we look forward, there's another 14 already under development right now. Of course, Indonesia and Malaysia have both launched theirs very recently. And the 14 that are under development are not in Europe. Half are in Africa and the remainder in Southeast Asia and Latin America. So despite these kind of national roadmaps emerging out of the EU to help these countries align with the the EU Circular Economy Action Plan. It's now truly global. When we look at how many policy commitments are in these 75 roadmaps, we identified 2,900. Now, to be frank, I personally believe that this means that the circular economy is the fastest growing environmental policy category in the world right now. What's more is these policy commitments, we're really moving beyond waste and recycling now, and governments are moving beyond this. And these policy commitments cut across 133 different types of public policy mechanisms. So governments are really starting to use the whole gambit of policy tools that they can to start to drive change. And then the third number is 17. And that's the number of sectors that are consistently being targeted. It's indicative that governments, they did really focus on the waste management sector. That was really it. But now it's looking at textiles, plastics, mining, energy. Every single materially intensive sector is being targeted within these roadmaps. And the key challenge for policymakers, particularly in the ASEAN region, which is a critical global producer of products, is to understand how all these policies combined will start to reconfigure value chains. And it's, in my opinion, very unpredictable right now. And it goes back to Ankit's point and Yvonne's point about being able to firstly baseline and measure what's actually going on in our economies in terms of material flows, with which then we can design robust policy. If you go to the next slide, please. And that's just, I wanted to give you a graphical representation of the growth of these roadmaps around the world. This is the global map in 2016 of national roadmaps and strategies. It's pretty sparse. I'd like to give a shout out to Japan, actually, who published their first one back in 1999. So despite the Europeans always claiming to be front runners, Japan has been doing this for a long time. And I think it should deserve that recognition. But if you click to the next slide, you'll see that how the global map has changed just from 2016 to today. It's right across every continent. So it's really, it's a global phenomenon, this. Now, a picture paints 1,000 words, and you've got to be careful with graphics, because what this potentially could be interpreted as is that the whole world is now moving quickly towards circularity. That's not the case. These are commitments to policies. They're not actually yet delivering on material change. Nonetheless, it is showing that the ambition of governments to drive systemic change, and this goes back to Ankit's point as well, and Yvonne's. We are at 7.2% circular, okay, but it will take a decade or 2 decades for the impacts of policies being placed today to actually have the genuine critical mass effect of change. So there's a huge lag time between what's been put in place and then what will come down the line. So that does give me a lot of optimism. Now you can see in the ASEAN region, that's really come alive in terms of national action on the circular economy. If you go to the next slide, I'll pick up on that. So when we look at the regional level versus the national level, and I think this is actually where the ASEAN region is excelling, and I think is genuinely a front runner compared to the rest of the world, in that the ASEAN bloc has recognized that they cannot transition to the circular economy by themselves as individual countries. In fact, there is far more to gain by partnering and working collaboratively across the region as a bloc to transition together. And that is shown through, and I won't touch on these too much detail because I think David is more of an expert on this, but there's the framework for the circular economy for the ASEAN Economic Community, and that I really think that is a genuinely leading framework because it sets out a long-term vision for the region to work collaboratively together. It covers 67 different initiatives, and it covers the key transboundary issues on value chains where countries need to work together, whether that's on trade facilitation, whether it's on standards harmonization, finance, digitization, whole range of different things. So I really would flag that as a fantastic effort. And then you've got your kind of stakeholder platforms and sector-specific roadmaps. So that fantastic things happen at the regional level, national level as well. So you've got Indonesia's roadmap just literally launched, and that has key sector focuses on food, construction, plastics, electronics, textiles. You've got Malaysia's roadmap as well, and then you've got Vietnam, who don't have a roadmap but have gone a step further, I would say, in enshrining the circular economy in hard law. In their 2020 law on environmental protection, puts circular everything from extended producer responsibility to green finance taxonomy, and there's a lot happening in Vietnam at the moment, which I think a lot of actors from Europe and other regions could learn a lot from. So to sum up, I would say that there's still a lot to do in the region in terms of putting in place the robust data monitoring, ex-ante and post-ante policy evaluation approaches. But I think it's safe to say the ambition is definitely there. And in kind of leapfrogging a lot of the hurdles and stumbles that particularly the EU faced in the early years, which took them a long time to get going. So I'd really congratulate that, celebrate that, and the more we can work together across regions outside the ASEAN region with ASEAN actors, the more likely we're going to achieve our collective goals. So I'll pause there for now and happy to take questions.
Thanks, Jack. So, I mean, it's so nice to see that it's such a recent phenomena with lots of policies and lots of good actions identified, lots of things happening. But because it's a recent phenomena, it will take some time for the results to show. And we don't know what the baseline is. And that the other point to flag here is also that the real effort required is now to implement these policies and actions, because that's where a lot of the issues and that's where the challenges come in. So that's where the real effort needs to be. So measuring and then implementing these policy frameworks. But let's go on to David, and David will give us a slightly more granular essence of what's happening in ASEAN, and maybe we can learn further. David, over to you.
Okay. Hi everyone. I hope you are having an amazing day. My name is David Trisuvit Ariyawat from the ASEAN Circular Economy Stakeholder Platform at the ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development Study and Dialogue in Bangkok, Thailand. Our center is funded by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in its capacity as a coordinator of sustainable development in ASEAN. So thank you so much for GI for your kind invitation. So I would touch upon, continue from what Dr. Jack mentioned earlier regarding some of the regional document, and then address Ankit's question on by giving some example of the good practice in ASEAN. Okay, can I have the slide, please? So while we are waiting for the second page of my slide, the report shown in the last slide of Dr. Jack earlier, like is the gap analysis. So back in 2018, in response to the growing interest in CE principle approach in this region and the need to share experience and good practice, CE has been taken up as a theme of ASEAN EU partnership endorsed by the ASEAN Senior Official on the Environment. Next slide, please. And with the support from the Enhanced Regional EU-ASEAN Dialogue Instrument, or E-READY in short, in 2019, ASEAN and EU launched this regional gap analysis on the state of circular economy for plastic in 10 ASEAN member states. And of course, as as usual, gap analysis identifies several types of gap: knowledge gap, skill gap, policy gaps, and make several recommendations for accelerating plastic circularity in ASEAN. And one of the recommendations is the establishment of an ASEAN platform for circular economy. Next slide, please. Consequently, the platform was established as a regional facility with a mission to help ASEAN member states achieve sustainable consumption and production by accelerating a transition to a circular economy. The platform provides access to different types of good practices strategy to our knowledge and information portal. We facilitate circular economy stakeholder engagement, organize joint event with partners, strategic partners, and of course we organize annual circular economy forums. We also support effective coordination and collaboration between two pillars of the ASEAN Secretariat, namely the AEC and the ASCC, the Economic Community and Socio-Cultural Community Dialogue Partners, as well as private sector to scale up and accelerate as regional transition to a circular economy. Next, please. So continue from encouraging message from Dr. Jack earlier regarding the development of regional framework for circular economy. So yes, indeed, the framework is ASEAN's first strategic move towards promoting circular economy for its long-term resilience. It set out ambitious goals, vision for circular economy by building on strength of existing ASEAN initiative and identify priority areas, as Dr. Jack mentioned earlier. And subsequently in the fall, in last year on January, the implementation plan as well as the work program to support the framework implementation was finalized. And before adopting this framework, CE principles were mainly applied to plastic and marine litter in this region, and mid-state are now exploring and already advancing their circular economy ideas nationally to different materials sectors. Next, please. In addition to the regional framework for the ASEAN Economic Community, the ASEAN Socio-Cultural Community also has an ongoing project on SCP and the development of the SCP framework, which is distinct from the economic approach of the AEC to the circular economy. It intended to guide collaboration and coordinated investment efforts between interested partners in this region on and national level activities with a view of strengthening synergy and building our network together for greater collective impact for this region. And it is expected to be the key next step for ASEAN member state to mainstream SCP and CE, of course, into regional and national action plan that could assist multi-stakeholder in engaging with the concept. Next, please. So allow me to give some example of good circular economy practice in this region on the implementation level. One of the notable sample is the integration of bioeconomy strategy within ASEAN circular economy framework. It is a key practice that supports sustainable agriculture and resource management. The ASEAN bioeconomy and circular economy development strategy guide member states in aligning their bioeconomy plans with CE principle, fostering sustainable agribusiness while enhancing food security. One of the great example is the Thailand zero waste policy in agriculture and its BCG economy model, where under this zero waste policy in agriculture, the organic waste is converted into bioenergy and fertilizers, reducing waste and promote resource recovery. Another notable example I wish to raise is the citizen engagement initiative, and it is a critical element in promoting circular economy initiative in this region where the level of awareness is still low. Community participation, enhanced recycling program, and SCP, as seen in Indonesia Waste Bank program or Thailand Trash Lucky program, where citizens deposit recyclables for financial reward. Furthermore, educational campaigns also play a big role in encouraging sustainable behavior across this region. So ASEAN region, has several promising circular economy practice that permit scaling up as well as replication within the region and beyond. So by focusing on some of the existing good practice, AMS can enhance their sustainability effort and contribute to the circular economy transition. So I just stop here for now. Thank you. Over to you, Ankit.
Thanks, David. So a few more examples on what's working. So in addition to Vietnam that Jack highlighted, David, you also highlighted Thailand, and also the whole aspect of bringing in or linking the circular bioeconomy policies, and then also the citizen engagement. I would also like to add Philippines is also attempting having concrete sort of regulatory measures in place. And so is Indonesia. I think they have the most elaborate framework of all ASEAN economies. But that again brings back to the key question as to the fact that there are lots of good examples, but then they need to be mainstreamed, as David was pointing out. Given this context, so I mean, if I'm just to recap the key messages, we started off with the fact that we don't know exactly how circular these economies are, and we don't know if all the sectors of the economy are equally sort of engaged on this. We also understood that there are lots of policy actions. The circular economy as a development pathway is recognized formally by most of the governments. And as David pointed, there are few examples of good practices, but they're not mainstreamed. Now, with those facts on the table, and given that we have 10 minutes left with us, I would like to ask all the three panelists and experts here as to what are those 3 action points that they feel closest to their heart should be implemented in ASEAN. And they need to be exclusive. So we cannot repeat and agree to one point. So just putting everyone on a spot here. I'll start with you, David, Jack, and Yvonne. I'll give you the most difficult task of going last, if that's okay. David, 3 actions that you feel are critical.
Okay, so first, as a multi-stakeholder platform, like I would like to point out the importance of the stakeholder engagement and collaboration, because engaging various sectors ranging from business, consumer, and local community, we can ensure that the transition is inclusive and consider diverse perspectives and needs of different stakeholders. Effective stakeholder engagement strategies can enhance the adoption of circular economy practice by fostering dialogue, exchange, and collaboration among different sectors. And the second action, of course, the establishment of the robust policy framework. The government in ASEAN countries or policymakers must try to create and implement policies that incentivize circular practice such as waste reduction, resource recovery, sustainable production method. Again, for example, at BCG economy model could serve as an example. The last action is the enhancement of the technological and logistical capability, which is imperative for the transition of a circular economy and development of a circular supply chain. So I will just stop here with 3 actions: stakeholder engagement, robust policy framework, as well as the enhancement of technological and logistical capability.
Thanks, David. Jack, your views?
Well, no, yeah, I agree with David's points. To add on to that, and what we've seen as a real challenge in these 75 roadmaps that exist is institutional capacity and governance. If governments are going to achieve a successful transition, you're talking about a systemic, long-term transition to a different economic system, and that cannot just be run by the Ministry for Environment, and that has to be an interministerial, coordinated approach. Now, there's several really good examples from around the world of governments recognizing this and building these kind of commissions, cross-party working groups to ensure that every ministry is actually aligned to each other and complementary. Nonetheless, internal politics within governments is a real challenge in bringing that forward. So I would say that's a really critical one. Second, and this is a little bit linked to David's point around policy kind of frameworks, but going beyond that, what we don't want is the launch of 25 policies in a scattergun, uncoordinated approach. They really have to work symbiotically together, this package of policies. It's the challenge the EU is learning right now in their 35 measures that they're launching in the CE action plan. The devil's really in the detail about how waste shipment regulations link with eco-design requirements, link with domestic regional trade agreements and financing contracts. So this all has to work in harmony. And at the moment, we don't fully know how to do that yet. Everyone's figuring it out. So I think the more we can share between governments on what works, what doesn't work, and then equally understand how our policy affects our trading partners and work together on that, the better, the more successful we're going to be. And then the third one, which I think is probably teeing up Yvonne, so I won't do it in much detail, but I think it has to be underpinned by robust data, obviously critical. But a second data set that I think is missing is consumption emissions data sets. That ties the transition to the circular economy intimately with the transition to net zero. And we've got to be sure that both transitions work together and one doesn't, build up emissions whilst the other one reduces. That has to be linked together. And consumption emissions data at a national level combined with material flow account data gives you that basic data set with which to then start designing your policies. So I'd say those 3 things, and then I'll pass over to Yvonne to finish.
This is really not fair. Everything's been said. Trying to come up with something in addition to your good points. The policies that are in place and that are being developed currently, like Jack said, they will have impact in, I think you said 10 to 20 years, right, Jack? That's where you actually see the fruits of those policies. We believe that we need to move faster than that. And the only way to do that is to ensure that the corporations are acting at the same time, not waiting for policies to be put in place, which means you need to have visionary leaders in these industries to be able to move without having to move. So without the policies telling them to move, but also wanting to move because it makes business sense. And I think that's where, based on my learnings from Climate Week in New York, to take sustainability and circularity apart and not leave circularity as part of the sustainability discussion in corporations. So for me, it would be essential for corporations to understand that a circular economy makes business sense from all angles. And I think ensuring that that's embedded and that that's understood, I think that's a key lever. The second one that I would like to add to the brilliant list that have already been put forward by Jack and David is the social angle. How do we ensure that it's identified as a jobs creation opportunity and not seen as a cost and a negative impact on our social structure, but that it actually creates jobs. But we have to be very specific to understand which types of jobs and which skills are needed to also then look at vocational training and the educational system. So that would be my second. And for the life of me, I've not thought of a third. I think if anything, if I had a magic wand, just adding on what Jack said, if a country leader would have a vision for their country that is multi-generational, everything will trickle down. And again, it's appealing to people. It's not a system. It's not a policy. It's the people that design the policy. It's the people that lead these industries and touching their hearts and making them understand that this is the only way forward. That would be my magic wand.
Thanks, Yvonne. I don't know why, but I would like to add one or two more points to that. I think we haven't measured circularity properly. So that's one action point that I feel is required, not just once, but over a series of time. And second thing is there's lots of development assistance. They all really need to focus and crowd in on implementing the policies rather than creating more policies. And that's where the learnings are. Only when they actually go down that road, they'll understand what kind of road and direction are we in. And that's still something that's not yet seen, at least within the governments in the region. It's a very difficult subject to introduce for us. We work with these ministries day in and day out, and it's not an easy conversation for us. So those are the additional 2 points. I think we have just about managed on time. I would like to take one more minute and repeat the 10 action points that we identified, because that's the takeaway for all of us for this 1 hour. So stakeholder engagement, collaborations, and citizen engagement, policy frameworks, more comprehensive policy frameworks, enhancement of skills and capabilities from the technical aspects and also the implementation capabilities, institutional capabilities, policy coordination, and not moving in different directions, as Jack pointed out, linkages, data frameworks. We just don't have the data. We don't know where the materials are flowing or as reliably. I mean, Indonesia example is a classic case. If we speak to Bapinas, they will tell you how difficult this was for them. So data frameworks, data sort of harmonization, because the way one country defines waste or a material is not the same in a different country. So comparability of data is something that I would add to Jack's points. Leadership, this is industrial and sort of market leaders not being proactive and not waiting for the push, the incentives or disincentives, Yvonne, as you identified. Looking at it from a jobs perspective and also sustainability of jobs going ahead. So very much economy linked, as Yvonne pointed out. And then lastly, very strong political leaders is also that is required. With that, I'll stop here. We have 1 minute over and there are other sessions that are lined up. I would like to thank Jack, Yvonne, David for your time, for sharing your insights and perspectives. And I'm sure this will be very useful for us and the stakeholders and the participants who are online and in the room. So I'll thank you. Thanks, Helena, for joining, for staying the entire length of this session. Any final words from your side, and we'll close after that.
Yeah, look, it's been lovely listening to everybody. So much knowledge, so many ideas about this important subject. I would just say from my perspective, the finance side is so important, and looking at innovative ways to, as you say, Yvonne, get the private sector involved. The Thailand example was exciting because we partnered with a private company through a competitive tender, aligning ourselves with a company that had a vision for a circular economy, but it was a waste company, and they hadn't used the refuse-derived fuel technology before. So we worked with them to transfer that technology, and they used it as a demonstration project, understanding that they would then have to champion for the whole industry. So, you know, there's so many things that can be done, and I think if we work together, we will get there. Anyway, thank you to you all, and thank you, Ankit, as well. Yeah, good evening, good night, good
Thank you
morning,
very much. Thank
wherever
you.
you're watching.
Thanks, everyone. Have a